closely at the ground beneath your feet. It feels solid. It feels permanent. We build our cities, our skyscrapers, and our lives on the assumption that the Earth is a cold, dead mass of rock and soil. We look up at space as the final frontier, spending billions to map distant stars. But we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about what lies 7 miles directly beneath our shoes. In May of 1970, a team of Soviet scientists began drilling a hole in the Kola Peninsula near the Arctic Circle. Their goal was simple. They wanted to drill as deep into the Earth's crust as humanly possible, just to see what was down there. For over 2 decades, they dug deeper and deeper, eventually reaching an incredible depth of over 12,000 meters. 7.5 miles of solid rock bored away by a massive steel drill. Then, in 1992, the project was abruptly shut down. The site was completely abandoned. Today, if you travel to the ruins of the Kola Superdeep Borehole, you will find a dilapidated, rusting concrete structure. And inside, welded shut with a thick steel cap and secured with 12 heavy industrial bolts, is the mouth of the hole. The official government explanation was economic. They claimed they ran out of funding after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They claimed the temperature at 12 kilometers reached over 350 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the drill bits to melt like plastic. But the official story is a lie. My grandfather, Dr. Emil Vance, was one of the lead acoustic engineers brought onto the Kola project during its final 3 years. He wasn't a geologist. He didn't care about rock formations or tectonic plates. His job was to lower specialized, ultra-sensitive, heat-resistant microphones down the shaft to record the deep vibrational frequencies of the tectonic plates. The government wanted to use the audio data to predict earthquakes. He never spoke about his work while he was alive. He died in a sterile, locked room in a psychiatric hospital in 2014, whispering to the walls about a door that had been opened. It wasn't until last month, when I cleared out his old attic, that I found his personal journals and a single, unmarked magnetic audio reel. What follows is the true, unredacted history of what the Soviet Union found down there. Turn your volume up. Lock your windows. Because the Earth is not a dead rock. It is a cage. According to my grandfather's journals, the trouble began when the drill hit 12,262 meters. For 3 weeks, the drill bit had been grinding through dense, compressed granite. The pressure gauges were normal. The acoustic feeds recorded nothing but the predictable, rhythmic, grinding drone of the diamond-tipped drill chewing through stone. But at exactly 4 in the morning on a Tuesday, the drill sudden dropped. The tension lines snapped loose. The digital readouts showed that the resistance had dropped to 0. The geologists were ecstatic. They believed they had discovered a completely unknown phenomenon. A massive, hollow cavern or a subterranean ocean hidden miles beneath the Earth's crust. They stopped the engines and prepared to lower a thermal imaging camera, and an acoustic microphone array to map the empty space. My grandfather was at the audio desk. He put on his heavy canvas headphones and adjusted the frequency dials. The cable descended slowly into the dark. 1 kilometer, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. The temperature readings began to skyrocket, climbing past 300 degrees. The microphone casing, built from a proprietary titanium alloy, hummed as it scraped against the smooth, glass-like walls of the deep borehole. When the microphone finally breached the ceiling of the hollow cavern, the static on the monitor changed. It shifted from a sharp, electric hiss to a low, hollow, echoing roar. It sounded like a massive, empty warehouse where a heavy wind was blowing through broken windows. But there was no wind 7 miles underground. My grandfather began to adjust the low-frequency filters, trying to isolate the sound of the tectonic movement. But as he turned the dial, the sound didn't clear up. It grew louder. It grew sharper. It wasn't the sound of grinding rock. It wasn't the sound of shifting tectonic plates. It was a voice. At first, he thought it was crosstalk from a radio tower on the surface. It happens sometimes with unshielded equipment. He checked the surface lines. They were dead. He checked the insulation. It was pristine. The audio signal was coming directly from the bottom of the hole. He leaned into his console, pressing the headphones hard against his ears. The voice was deep, incredibly slow, and completely distorted by the immense distance. It didn't sound like a human throat. It sounded like the tectonic plates themselves were vibrating to form words. It spoke a dialect of ancient Sumerian, a language that had been dead for thousands of years. My grandfather wrote down the phonetic translation in his journal. The voice said, "The ceiling is thin. We can hear your needles scratching our skin. Stop digging, or we will show you how we breathe." The entire room went dead silent. The geologists stared at the audio monitor. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Then, a second sound entered the microphone feed. It was a wet, heavy, rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 thump. A massive heartbeat, shaking the very air inside the laboratory. The audio level meters spiked into the red. The glass on the frequency monitors began to crack from the pure acoustic pressure. And then, the microphone didn't just stop recording, it was crushed. The telemetry showed that the titanium housing had been subjected to a sudden, catastrophic force of over 50,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. It was clamped shut like a bug under a heavy boot. The project director immediately ordered the crew to pull the cable back up. When the steel cable finally emerged from the mouth of the borehole 4 hours later, the titanium microphone was gone. The end of the heavy, reinforced steel cable wasn't snapped or broken. It had been melted. The steel was bubbling and warped, smelling heavily of sulfur and raw, decaying flesh. The Soviet government did not shut the project down that day. Instead, they classified everything. They brought in military guards with automatic rifles. They forced every scientist to sign a non-disclosure agreement under threat of immediate execution or exile to a Siberian labor camp. They wanted to know what was down there. They wanted to weaponize it. They manufactured a new, heavier drill bit, reinforced with tungsten carbide. They spent 6 months lowering a secondary, heavily armored camera capsule down the shaft. This time, they didn't just send a microphone. They sent a high-intensity halogen light and a video transmission line. My grandfather sat in the corner of the room, watching the glowing green radar screen. He didn't want to be there. He knew they were poking a sleeping predator. The camera capsule descended into the black abyss of the hollow cavern. The video feed on the monitor was grainy, distorted by the massive electromagnetic interference from the Earth's core. For the first 10 minutes, the screen showed nothing but a vast, terrifying emptiness. The halogen light cut through a thick, yellow, sulfurous fog that seemed to boil inside the cavern. Then the camera hit the floor of the cavern. The monitor flickered, stabilized, and revealed the topography of the subterranean world. The geologists gasped. My grandfather felt the blood completely drain from his face. The floor of the cavern wasn't rock. It wasn't stone. It was a landscape made entirely of compressed living bone. Massive, jagged rib cages that stretched for miles into the dark, acting as mountain ranges. The ground was a pale, ivory-colored crust of calcified human skulls, fused together by layers of wet, dark red muscle tissue that was visibly pulsing. The entire cavern was a living anatomy, a massive, continent-sized biological entity buried alive beneath the Earth's crust. As the camera panned to the left, the halogen light illuminated a massive structural rift in the bone floor. And crawling out of that rift, climbing toward the light, was something that made the lead scientist drop his clipboard. It was a hand, but it wasn't human. It was a massive, pale, multi-jointed appendage made of twisted muscle fibers and jagged bone fragments, stretching over 30 feet wide. It didn't have skin. It was raw, bleeding meat, crawling up the side of the cavern wall with a sickening, wet, frantic speed. It was climbing the borehole. It was following the cable up to the surface. At that exact second, the audio speakers in the laboratory burst into life with a deafening, high-pitched screech. It wasn't static. It was the sound of millions of human voices screaming in unison, a chorus of pure, unadulterated agony that rattled the metal light fixtures on the ceiling. The hand reached the camera capsule. The screen went to absolute black static. The laboratory erupted into absolute chaos. The military guards began screaming orders. The project director reached for the emergency kill switch, but before his hand could touch the button, the ground beneath the laboratory began to shake. A massive, localized earthquake, measuring 7.2 on the Richter scale, tore through the facility. The concrete floor split open. The heavy metal drilling machinery tipped over, crushing 2 engineers instantly. The air inside the lab filled with the thick, choking stench of rotten blood and burning sulfur. Through the cracks in the floor, a dark, viscous, black liquid began to bubble up. It wasn't oil. It was cold, thick, and reeked of decay. My grandfather watched in horror as a drop of that liquid touched the bare skin of an engineer's arm. Within seconds, the man's skin began to blister, turn white, and calcify, hardening into a solid, brittle bone-like texture. His arm was being turned to stone while he was still alive. The military guards fired their weapons down into the cracks of the floor, shooting at nothing but the dark shadows. It was a massacre of panic. My grandfather didn't wait for permission. He grabbed his journals, ran out of the shaking building into the freezing Arctic air, and never looked back. He hid in the forests for 3 days until the military vehicles finally rolled out. When the Soviet government officially closed the site a week later, they didn't just pack up their tools. They brought in structural engineers with tons of industrial concrete. They poured thousands of gallons of liquid cement down the borehole, sealing it forever. They placed a heavy steel cap over the mouth of the shaft, welded it directly to the bedrock, and secured it with 12 heavy industrial bolts. They tried to bury the mouth of the god they had woken up. My grandfather spent the rest of his life looking at the floor. He refused to live on the second story of any building. He refused to walk on grass or dirt, staying strictly on thick concrete sidewalks where he felt safe. He told me right before he died that the cement they poured down that hole wouldn't hold forever. Acid eats concrete. Bone breaks steel. He told me that every year, the tectonic plates move a few inches. Every year, the cage grows a little weaker. I am looking at his magnetic audio tape right now, sitting on my desk. I haven't played it. I am too terrified to hear what is on the other side of that static. Because last night, a minor earthquake hit my city. It wasn't large, just a gentle, rolling vibration that shook the picture frames on my wall. But when I put my ear directly against the hardwood floor of my bedroom, I didn't hear the sound of the city. I didn't hear the traffic. I heard a heartbeat, slow, wet, massive thump-thump, thump-thump, and a faint, raspy whisper vibrating through the wood, calling out my name. The Earth is not a planet. It is an organism, and we are just the parasites crawling across its skin, scratching too deep with our little needles. Next time you feel a tremor beneath your feet, don't think of it as a natural disaster. Think of it as a giant shifting in its sleep, and pray to whatever gods you believe in that it doesn't decide to wake up.